Tawana Hamill, and I am here today to talk to our tribal council and our chief about a revamp for our burial assistance program. This all came about through a story that was shared with me in our language class at work. The instructor for our language class sings at our many funerals. We have like a group for traditional hymns to be sang at Choctaw funerals and things like that. So one day we asked her in class, like, hey, can you share a story with us after our lesson, because she's an elder in the community and she tells us a lot of really neat stories. And what she said to us that week was that she was going to share a really sad story, and it was kind of on her heart and that she wanted to share it, and she wasn't sure why, but she felt like that was the story that she wanted to share with us. So her story was about a young Choctaw boy who this happened, I believe it was around this summertime this year. It hasn't been too far of the time period away from now when this happened. And he was from, I want to say Broken Bow, but I could be wrong. It was just not too far away, and it was pretty recent. And the young Choctaw boy had his funeral, and she was going to sing in it. So she gets to the funeral, and she noticed that the program wasn't moving, there wasn't an obituary and things like that, and she was kind of wondering why, because she has been to many funerals and sang, and they don't usually stop for so long. And so when she looked at she was kind of like looking, and she finally noticed that nobody was reading an obituary or anything like that for the young boy in his funeral. So she started asking, some people, like, hey, what's going on? And like, why is the funeral not moving along? And somebody said, well, they didn't pay for all of the services, and so they weren't able to complete the funeral program. And she kind of asked some more questions, and what she had found out was that they went through our tribal burial assistance program. However, since our program does $2,500, that doesn't even cover not even half of funeral costs today for a basic funeral program. So the average cost is $6,000, and without being able to pay it in full, the funeral director had stopped the funeral, and sadly somebody had to figure out something, not knowing the boy and things like that. They had to kind of figure out a speaker, and it was just a really sad situation. So I was really confused about why she wanted to share it, besides that it was so sad and she didn't really have a conclusion to it. Just that his funeral wasn't done, and she thought that was sad, and she shared it. It's really funny though how things turn out, because later on, a few weeks down the road, this had kind of stuck with me, and I was invited to the director's meeting so they could introduce me as a new Choctaw Nation employee. And when I was at the meeting, our chief spoke about how our tribe had been granted a settlement with millions of dollars. So with these millions of dollars, he had asked our directors there, and asked the directors to get with their teams and employees to come up with some new ideas, new programs, new business ventures, because right now Choctaw Nation is not 100% dependent upon themselves, but they are really close. We're in the 90s, and they would like to see us be 100% dependent upon ourselves. So I walked away from the meeting, and somewhere along the way it kind of came to me that we have the burial assistance program that's not helping people get buried properly all the time, and then that we have these millions of dollars, and how sad it is that we can have all this money but yet somebody can't be honored at a time of death the way that they should be, especially with them being so young. That's such a tragic event to go to. So it kind of came to me out of nowhere that, hey, I remembered a professor saying one time that funerals were always in demand. Funeral services, like, that's a business that would never go away, because if there's one thing that we're always certain of in life, it's death. So that stuck with me too. And then immediately it was like a light bulb, like, oh my gosh, that would be a great business for Choctaws to invest in. So I did share with my director, like, my idea, and asked him what he thought. And he said that he thought it was really great, and he could see it even going into other aspects, because Choctaw has land. We have a lot of land that is not being utilized right now, And he said, you know, what if we were to even use that as burial places? And then that would decrease the cost for people that need to be buried. So there's a couple things that I was looking at, and that was, number one, we know that a death plus a funeral is a lot of money. And as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be all sorts of things that just aren't going to be covered, and burial assistance is only sometimes available, and they do have to be eligible and low income, and when they are, a lot of the money is like the $2,500. So what I started looking at was, well, $2,500, that's a lot of money, but $6,000 is the average basic funeral cost, so that's not even half. And I understand that Choctaw can't pay so much all the time out and not receive any money coming back. That would just be a constant flow. So I spoke with our burial assistance program, an employee inside the department, and she told me that as of 2014, we were spending the $2,500 per burial. That is 529 in 1 year, plus 108 pending funerals that were went through the burial assistance program. So Choctaw Nation spent over $1 million and getting nothing in return. So this seems like a great way, if we were to have a business that is not going to go, it's not going to go out, it's always going to be needed, that we could all rest in peace if we were to have a program that could not only profit, but it could definitely reduce cost if we were to do this funeral business ourselves. We would be able to create jobs for people. We would be able to assure that people are buried properly. We would be able to provide traditional services. We could profit from it by offering funeral services to everyone. And then the burials could be plots, people could be able to purchase those and things like that. So my overall thought is, if we were to get into the business of funeral services, and we could prevent a lot of heartache for families that are struggling, because we do know that in our Native communities we have a lot of low-income families, and they aren't able to prepare for a $6,000 cost, and at the end of the day, probably not even the other half. And we don't think about it or prepare for it, especially for our children. So if we're not financially able to, then we turn to our tribe and hope that they can help. And with the money that we're allotted, I think it would be a great business. And so I'm asking today that you take into consideration to have a business that will not only help us, but help everyone, and give us a way to take a negative and turn it into a positive. And that's both financially and emotionally. And I thank you for your time.